Hello all, welcome to the JavaScript for Pentesters course on Pentester Academy. Now in this video, we will look at advanced form manipulation. Now from a pentester's perspective, forms are a very important thing simply because when you find an XSS or an HTML injection on a page with a form, you can enhance your proof of concept pretty much to do really interesting things. Now, depending on what you want to do, the building blocks pretty much remain the same. So the first, of course, is intercepting a form submit or any other event in the form you're interested in. Now, a form submit would typically ensure that before the data is posted on the server, you would probably get to read it, maybe modify it, and then decide what needs to be done, including either not submitting the form or allowing the form to be submitted either to the original server or a server controlled by you. Now in this video, we are going to look at all of these demonstrations. So let's jump right in. Now I've created a very simple template HTML file containing a form, and this form just has a username and a password field. You should be able to download this template from the link below the video. So this is how the form looks like, very simple. And at this point, the form gets submitted to /authenticate, which doesn't exist. So, even though we aren't at this point going to submit or do anything with the form, just keep in mind this is a URL on the server, right? Now, the first thing, of course, is that you would have to intercept the form submit. Now, when we do a couple of exercises in the challenges section, you will have to exploit an XSS and then insert all of this JavaScript. In this example, of course, I am assuming that you can write JavaScript on the page and which would execute. So the first thing, of course, is to ensure that we can tap into the submit event. So first, of course, is to write a function which would go ahead and process that event. Let's call it Intercept Form. For the time being, let's not write anything inside. Now, in order to be able to ensure that intercept form is called whenever the submit button is pressed, we are going to say test.submit. Now, if you notice, test is the ID of this specific form, equals intercept form. Now this should be clear because we've already covered this when we talked about events in JavaScript, right? Sorry, it's test.onSubmit because that is really the handler. Now inside this, there's something very interesting. Now if this function returns a true, then the form submit proceeds. If this returns a false, then the form submit will not happen. So let me try this variation. Let's do a return false. And let me go back in here, refresh this page, and let me feed in, let's say, ABCD, XYZ. Let me click on submit. And if you notice, nothing really happened, right? Now, if I go back in here and convert this to a true, let me refresh the page, put in Vivek, ABCD, click on submit. If you notice, the form submit went through. Of course, /authenticate doesn't really exist anywhere, so it failed, right? So this is the first thing I want you to take note of, which is we can control if the form will be eventually submitted or not. right? Now let's say currently we are not interested in submitting the form. Rather, we are only interested in playing with the form. Now, the first thing is, how can we read the different values the user has typed in into this? So there are really two ways. One is you can use the different IDs of these form elements and all of that to reference. So as an example, let's do an alert of document.forms. I'm going to reference this by the ID test. And then inside of it, let's say I want username, so I can reference this by username, right? And after that, we can pretty much say dot value to figure out the current value. There we go. Let me refresh the page. And let's click on submit. And if you notice, the value Vivek was alerted, right? I can pretty much put anything in here, and that would be inside the alert box. So this is one way. The other way is, if let's say the IDs are not mentioned, then we could reference it by the form number. Let's say this is form 0, so only one really. And then the elements of that form, we are picking up the first one now. 0 was username, pass would be 1. And then we can display the value, right? So let's go back in here. Let me refresh this form page. Let me put in my ultra secretive password. You can basically say never for this site, so we aren't bothered anymore. And that is my ultra secret password, as you can clearly see, right? Fantastic. So what we've learned till now is how to intercept the submit event, ensure that we can probably fail the submit and really do nothing. We've also learned how to read the different values from the form. Now let's look at how to modify it. Now, if you're thinking it's anything complicated, you couldn't be further away from the truth. It's probably simpler than you realize. All we have to do is put this to whatever we want. Now in this case, I'd like to change the username field so that we can view it. And let me call the name Jacob, right? I'm going to refresh the form, go back in, put in something arbitrary, reflect the username, password, but keep looking in here. After this, if you notice, the username field was changed to Jacob automatically, right? And this is really the power of JavaScript, which is we can change things on the fly. Now, this is how you modify different values in the form. Now that we've seen how to modify values, let's look at how to submit this form to the attacker controlled server. First thing which needs to be done, of course, that we need to set up a web server where we can get this information sent through our JavaScript. So that's simple. Let's use netcat and start listening on port 8000. Go back in here. Now, all we need to do is change the form action, which currently points to /authenticate, to the URL which we desire. So we can actually do a document.form0, copy it, paste it in here, .action equals our URL, let's say localhost 8000, and that's it. Now, of course, we would want the form to be processed, or rather submitted, so let's return a true. Now I can go back in here, refresh the page, type in security tube and a long complicated password. Here is our username. Here is the password. And if you notice, looks like we are submitting to localhost 8000 question mark blah blah blah. If I go back in here, we have received all of that data, right? Now, because the attacker's web server, which I'm simulating, isn't a real server at this point, pretty much we are just hung waiting for the response. Now, in the real world, the attacker would have this server and could even redirect back to the original website, which will ensure that the victim might not even notice that the form was submitted to the attacker's website, right? Fantastic. So hopefully this illustration was very clear, and now you're able to read, modify, and post the form to arbitrary URLs which you control. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video, and if you like what you see here on Pentester Academy, then we would really appreciate if you can recommend us to your friends and colleagues in the InfoSec community. Thank you.